Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training. And in today's video, I'm going to be sharing a conversation I had with Benjamin Keep. Benjamin is a PhD in learning science and technology design from Stanford University. He also has a law degree from Cornell. Besides having a YouTube channel which talks about learning strategies and teaching, he also is a writer, consultant, and researcher. He works with companies to evaluate the effectiveness of their training as well as their learning strategies. So I thought he was a great resource and uniquely qualified to talk about different training methods that we do as chess players and how we can improve them and use them to help us improve at chess. So enjoy the conversation. Okay, hey guys, I am so happy to have Benjamin Keep here to talk to you about training methods. And just to start out, we started to talk about this, and I thought it would be good to record this part. I think the list that I came up with will have some that will have followers that are very strident about their use of this training method and how it's valuable to them. And I think, well, Ben, you could speak to this. I think every training method that we're going to talk about has some value, but maybe more can be optimized, or maybe some might be a little more practical than others, depending on people's goals.
Yeah, no, for sure. I totally agree with that. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Um, the way that I like to think about it is that every learning experience teaches you something. The question is what, and how efficient it is at teaching you that thing. And so, if you like, for every technique that we're going to talk about, I think we'll probably be getting into say, hey, this technique is really good at doing X, and maybe it's not so good at doing Y. So depending on what your priorities are, you can kind of pick and choose what you think is best to do for you.
That sounds great. And just as a kind of a background, I thought it would be great to have Ben on here. I watched a few of his videos about deliberate practice, and he actually is up on some of the old research on chess and cognitive science and learning. And so, but Ben, if I'm correct, you know how to play chess, but you're not an avid chess player, but you do play some other strategy games. Is that correct? Just to give everybody.
Yeah, that is true. So I played poker pretty seriously for a little while. I played Magic for, I don't know, ever since I was young, for 20 years or something, or I guess 30 years. I have played chess as a kid. I enjoyed it a lot. In high school, I got into Go and just started playing Go more seriously. But I always enjoy a good chess game. I'm just no good at it right now. um, so pretty much, if any of you want to play chess with me, you just like mop the floor with me, and that'll be that. And you can be happy with that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I thought it was important to say that because I think sometimes chess players learn from stronger chess players who maybe learned a specific method based on who their coach was or their people they were around with. And I wanted to have a more, I don't want to call it an objective viewpoint, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. And even on this channel, I've talked about this is the way I like to train, or this is what I recommend to people. But I wanted to get a point of view of how can we make how we train better. And I know chess players love to talk about this. So the key after you guys watch this video and after you digest everything is to go out and do it and maybe leave some feedback in the comments on it. So with that in mind, why don't we get started? And I shared this list with Ben earlier, so it's not totally out of the blue, and it's sort of a hodgepodge. Some of these things I do, some of these things I don't do, and obviously I have my own opinion, which I'll share as well. But why don't we go ahead and get started here? And the first topic I have here is blindfold chess. And so this is playing chess or doing exercises without being able to see the pieces and the board. And just for Ben's benefit, usually how this is listed, either people will play chess, like they'll start from the position and they'll start saying the moves with the notation, and they'll play a game, or they'll have listed, okay, the king is over here, the pawns are over here, there's a queen over here, find the best
Right,
move for white or for black. So that's sort of
right,
so blindfold training in general, I guess.
right. So I'm happy to offer my opinion. The first thing I really thought of wasn't actually much to do with scientific research, but uh, maybe what you would call a cross-cultural comparison. So, do you know any other game in which playing blindfolded is held in high esteem? And I was trying to think of another game, any kind of other strategy game. Settlers of Catan. Do people play that blindfolded and think that benefits them? Do they people play Go blindfolded? Do people play, Magic or poker or any of these strategy games blindfolded? And I mean, maybe I was missing something, but I was coming up with like, not that many people do that, or think it's a very good idea. So I think that's one little nugget of like, this seems relatively unique to chess. And so I wonder if there is a cultural component here about how chess was popularized, and that playing blindfolded is a very neat trick, and the people can do it who can do it well, you know, maybe played a role in popularizing chess, and kind of, it's a cool thing to do. And in some other games, it might just not be possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just as a little context, I think part of the rationale behind doing it is, when we are looking at a position, we're trying to evaluate a position that's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 moves in the future. And I think the idea is, if you learn how to have vision of the board without actually seeing it, you can actually visualize, because that's where a lot of mistakes are made, especially for and from the highest levels on down, is, oh, I forgot that my queen was, or I didn't see that that queen was covering that
Right.
square, and so I
Right.
blundered
I
a
didn't have
piece.
that vision
And so
of the board.
the so I guess from that, okay, but now with that context, I guess and maybe it might be, as we look at some of these other methods, it might kind of spill over. But that's interesting. So there are two kind of views. One is that you should that it is helpful, because if the more you strengthen that visual skill, I guess we could say, in your being able to see a position in your mind that's not currently on the board. And then some people would say, well, but you have that first board as the reference. You have the position that you have at hand, and then when you're looking forward, so the ability maybe to see a board that's 30 moves ahead might not be as relevant as just being able to say 2 or 3 moves ahead, especially at the amateur level.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are there's a couple of things going on. One is that the what's called cognitive load is basically the amount of effort that your working memory
Mm-hmm.
has to exert to kind of keep things available to you to think about. And when you're doing blindfold chess, you are basically adding to your cognitive load. And so the
Right.
question is that an important addition, or is that not an important addition?
Ah.
And so, like, is it really critical for you to, because I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, but I
Yeah.
assume would be, my assumption would be that if you play blindfold chess, you are a worse player than you playing without a blindfold on, or being able to see the board.
Right.
Um, and part of that is this drain on your cognitive kind of power in those moments, at least. And so I think in the immediate, like, while you are playing, you are clearly stressing your working memory. And the reason why I think maybe it's not that useful of a stressor
Mm-hmm.
for your brain is that, um, I mean, I think I kind of favor the second argument you gave, where in actual practice you have the board there in front of you to look at. And so the skill that you are practicing when you're doing blindfold chess is actually slightly different than the skill that you are doing when you actually play chess. And I mean, this is just, I don't know that there's a lot of research on blindfold chess. There is um, some studies. I did a little bit of homework because I was looking at these. There are some studies that look at various training factors, and I think we'll talk about them a little bit later on too. And blindfold chess was not correlated with kind of chess
Okay.
outcomes. Now, that that doesn't say a whole lot, because it's kind of like you look at the people who play blindfold chess and the people who don't, and you kind of see like what their rankings are. It doesn't really directly answer the question of like,
Right.
is blindfold chess helpful? But yeah, my instinct is like, if you want to get good at blindfold chess, then obviously
Right.
do your thing, do your thing. Blind. I think it's cool. I think it's, but that I'm not sure that it really adds anything to the experience as far as being a better chess player on the whole. The other thing that makes me think that is that when people try to study the components of chess skill,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking at various aspects of various I don't know, you might call them mental abilities, and one of these abilities that is commonly thought of as a key ability is visual spatial ability. But I have that seems to be the one kind of intelligence factor that is not at all correlated
Interesting.
with chess expertise. And in fact, there are studies that show that a negative correlation
Wow.
between between that and chess outcomes. So again, these are correlations. They're not really something you can sink your teeth into, but it's at least a food for thought. It should at least like make you pause and be like, is there a better way to spend my time?
Right.
Would be
Right. And
my
I
would
think,
be my angle, I guess.
oh, okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I do think it's something where now again, just for everybody, if you enjoy playing blindfold chess, go for it. We're not saying,
Yes.
but just in terms of if you have a limited amount of time, which many adults who have jobs and kids and families and stuff have, we might want to look elsewhere for improvement opportunities or a way to spend that improvement time that we have. Okay, great.
What?
Actually,
Sorry, one more
oh
one
yeah,
more final thing. I just looked at my notes real quick because I forgot something. But another interesting thing when you see a lot of problem solving studies is you look for um, eye movements. Expert Experts focus on different things when they're looking at the board than novices do.
Hmm.
And this is going to be true in almost any kind of problem solving, game playing kind of environment. And so there is an element of like robbing yourself to some degree of an external object that you are leveraging to help you kind of play the game. I mean, I guess it goes back to this kind of second theory that you were talking about, where it's like I have this object here that normally helps me, and I think if you were to look at experts, they probably spend a lot of time fixating on certain points of the board depending on what the position is. And so you might want to think about, well, maybe I should mimic that myself. I don't know. That's my take.
Yeah, no, that's very good.
Yep.
Okay, so our next topic that we're going to be talking about is Blitz chess. So this is, as you may be familiar, there's a clock with each side has a certain amount of time. After you probably see it on the movies, after they make the move,
Yes.
they hit the clock. And Blitz chess is playing very quickly. So typically, a lot of people play a 3 minute game. So each side has 3 minutes. And if you run out of time, you lose. Sometimes they have like 2 seconds added to that, something like that, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and they even have what they call bullet chess, which is like 1 or 2 minutes. So very fast. And I think the general consensus is that it for chess players is that it's more fun than helpful, but it can help get a lot of experience in specific structures and openings that people play. So it does have that limit as well as being able to see quick patterns and that type of thing. So that's the context of the blitz chess. So what do you think, Ben?
Right. Okay. So for this one, I was a little more on the fence, I guess. It was a little unclear to me whether whether it would be helpful or not. Um, so I did do a fair amount of like searching on Google Scholar about what the existing research says about this, um, and it seems like there's a couple of different kind of angles on this. At least, I mean, we're getting a little slice of at least the published research that people have done, which isn't necessarily an accurate representation of the overall experiences that people have with it. But it seems like one one thing is that blitz chess is correlated with overall chess skill, which maybe isn't that interesting because if you play a little faster, you're still better than someone who's worse than you, also
Right.
playing faster, right.
Right.
Maybe that's not saying too much, and it was kind of weakly correlated, your skill level at blitz with your skill level at I guess a normal chess game. But it seems like blitz has the potential for changing the way that people play.
Hmm.
And in terms of risk taking, for example, I saw one that talked about how women chess players tended to take more risks during blitz chess than during normal chess. And I wasn't exactly sure how they measured a risk-taking
Interesting.
move, but presumably they have some way of saying like this was a riskier move than another. Um, and so I do think that if you played a lot, you could potentially kind of like maybe warp your sense of the game in some sense.
I see.
Um, but I mean, there's also this issue of like what's a symptom and what's a cause. So
Yeah.
I presume blitz players or people who kind of advocate this approach are like, hey, like playing fast is going to make me fast at evaluating positions. Say good at evaluating chess positions very quickly.
Mhm.
And I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the case. What you see with high levels of chess expertise is people can kind of remember positions very well when these brief flashes of like whole board positions, and expert players can remember very well. Of course, you can remember kind of whole games you played and etc. Um, but I mean, some of that comes from the experience of playing. So you have to look at it to think about, well, like what's generating the expertise and what is kind of causing I guess what is causing the expertise to be kind of
Right.
so high. And so if it's I don't think it's always the case that kind of doing things fast leads to fast thinking. Um, by analogy, research on, say, like math problem solving, for instance,
Hmm.
there's a fair amount to in favor of like kind of slower, the value of slower problem solving,
Okay.
and the kind of like encouraging people to go faster, faster, faster ends up creating some kind of bad habits.
I
At
see.
least in middle school, high schoolers, this kind of thing. But that's a bit of a stretch to go from math problem solving to chess problem solving. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have further thoughts?
Yeah, actually,
Uh,
two things. Well, maybe more than two things. A couple. One problem that some chess players have in tournament games. And again, to give you a context, typically, tournament game, what people would consider like a serious tournament game, could last 3 or 4 hours, with each side having a couple hours
right.
per time, on their clocks. And I won't get into all the details. There are different variations on that, but the idea being that sometimes chess players use up all that time and they're playing, and they usually have like what they call either a delay or an increment, meaning that the clock doesn't start until after 5 or 10 seconds, or they get time added on with each move. So
Hmm.
sometimes, and I've been in a case of this too, where we have very little time on the clock, so we're playing very fast, and so the theory is having some blitz experience will kind of inoculate you from that stress and the pressure in terms of being able to make decisions quickly. Um, but overall, yeah, it could lead to bad habits if you do it excessively. So
Yeah, I
what?
think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think like it's a way. Something else that came up was like, where are people on the journey to chess expertise?
Hmm,
Strong players, it seems like, are take much less of a hit when they play blitz chess in terms of how good they are. Weak players take a huge hit in
okay,
terms of how good they are if you ask them to play blitz chess. They're making mistakes all over the place. And I think like the value might, like if you're really just starting out, maybe getting a really sound foundation is important first before kind of starting to play a lot of Blitz, and then maybe as you get better, kind of incorporate a little bit more Blitz into your game. Just for the same reason that you're saying, like sometimes you need to be playing fast, and you need experience in that. And I do think there's some value, like you talked before about, it's a whole game compressed into a small amount of time. So if you took 3 hours, like how many Blitz games could you play?
Right.
You could play an insane number of Blitz games,
yeah.
and seeing that, like, there is value in seeing variation, right? Especially like, let's say you're playing the same opening over and over and over again, right? But your opponents are playing different moves against you.
Right.
It seems like that's a pretty good way of at least getting like seeing a kind of lay of the land, of like, oh, okay, like I'm familiar with that one. I lost that game, but I'm kind of familiar with that like pattern a little bit. I'm familiar with that pattern. I definitely would not say like don't ever do it. I mean, I think it seems like it has a role to play in improving your skill.
Well, there was a famous, at the opposite side, there was a famous world champion, Mikhail Botvinnik, who said, I played a Blitz game once. It was on a train to Amsterdam or something like that. And basically, because he advocated this rigorous analysis, scientific movement. But there's other very world-class players who, Bobby Fischer being one who just, he would come to the club and just play for hours and hours Blitz. And so, or Hikaru Nakamura, a more current player, plays tons of Blitz and is one of the top Blitz players, but is also one of the top slow players. And I think it's something where, so it sounds like it's sort of, as you get stronger in your overall skill, Blitz might have a place being a little more useful as a tool. The beginning side of things, you want to kind of build that foundation with the strategy, learning the game, playing a little slower so you don't make as many mistakes and can learn from that. And, at least that's what we're looking at right now. And I think that's kind of what people think anyway. So.
Yeah. And I will say, like with any of these kind of our assessments here, it's like, we could be wrong. We could be wrong. But that's kind of the fun of looking at it, at least from somewhat of an empirical viewpoint. It's like, look, this is the evidence that we have. This is our best guess, and maybe it's different from what we say, but yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, let's go on to the next one here, and some of these are going to overlap, guys, because I know we do timer exercise and all this stuff, but this one is sort of a let's see here. Did I put it in the wrong order? There's one I did not put the headline on for, or I thought I did. One moment here. This one is, I know it says it's going to say the Woodpecker method here, and for some reason I didn't make a slide, but using a chess engine to analyze your games or find the best move. So, now, maybe 20 years ago, chess engines were not as good as, maybe 30 years ago, were not as good as the top masters. But now, pretty much we know that chess engines, we play a computer with the top engines, the greatest players. And Magnus would lose most of his games against it, or at least in a match, but we have these tools, beautiful tools, to be able to tell us, instead of this, you should have played this, and there's one side says, but that kind of teaches you not to, you stop thinking when you have this. It's like using a calculator, if you, and you don't learn how to evaluate the positions, look at it yourself. And it's not telling you, here's the best move, but it's not necessarily telling you why. And so some people advocate limiting the use. Some people say, hey, you know what? It's giving you the objectively, or at least according to the technology of today, the objectively best move. Why shouldn't you get that feedback? And I'm going to guess the answer is somewhere in between. So what do you...
I would say I agree with both of them. I think out of just from the techniques that we've already discussed, this one to me has the most promise, but you have to use it in the right way. So maybe I can outline like a way that I think is helpful and maybe a way that's not helpful. So one way that I think isn't very helpful would just to say like walk through I don't know, say a game where the chess engine is like showing you the next best move, and you're just like, oh, that's the next best move, that's the next best move.
Okay.
So you're just kind of, this is kind of like you're reading. It's almost like I don't know a good analogy, but it's kind of like, you know, you're reading a textbook. You know, someone's just telling you things. Um, and I think, like the first group that you mentioned, you know, you're not getting this skill of actually figuring out on your own.
Right.
A good way to do it is to find the move that you think is best, and not just find the move that you think is best, but also give some reasons. You know, like internally, or you could even write them down so that you don't, you know, fool yourself later on
Right.
when you see that something's different and you're like, oh yeah, maybe it wasn't as good. Yeah, I was gonna pick that one. But actually, kind of like you know, pick what you think is the best move, and maybe have some reasons why, and then see what the chess engine says. I think that is a pretty valuable. Now, you doing that like for every single move of a game, I think can be a little overwhelming and maybe isn't the best use of your time. But that moment when you see that you made a mistake, or maybe that you got it right, for the reasons that you kind of gave these reasons. You don't know if the reasons are correct, but you know that the move was correct according to the chess engine. Those are the moments when you really are getting that valuable feedback.
Right.
You know, that you mentioned one little piece that I think is so important, which is you don't know why the chess engine picked the move that it did.
Right.
And this, I think, is a good opportunity either to take some time. You know, I mean, it depends, right, on how much time this is. You know, what is the efficiency of doing this versus, say, playing a bunch of Blitz games.
Right. Right.
But the if you never ask yourself why, if you're just like, oh, yep, okay, oh, that was the best move. Okay, I was wrong. Okay, moving on to the next move. You know, what do I think the next move is here? And do, if you never ask yourself why, you're missing a huge part of how this might be valuable for you. And I think that it's a good opportunity for me. The thing that makes me immediately think of is getting a group together, a group of like 3 or 4 players, and doing this in a game that one of you had with like a, you know, like I think it'd be fun. People are picking their moves. You're seeing the chess engine move, and then you can have actually a good discussion about like, oh, well, why do you think they picked that? Oh, maybe it's because X, Y, and Z, or maybe, you know, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But that to me both sounds fun and also sounds productive. But even if you're just by yourself, like, you need to be thinking about why. Otherwise, it's not. You're not going to get a lot out of it.
I think this is something where, again, maybe as players are growing in experience, might be able to get more benefit out of the chess engines. Because there's a couple of masters out there who basically say until you become a master, you should never use the chess engine. But again, if you're saying at an intermediate level and you're playing a move, or say a specific type of, you're making the same type of mistake and you're never getting that feed. This is assuming that you only have yourself or you're not talking to other people. But let's say you keep making the same mistake and you're not, where an engine could say, oh, well, that's wrong because, and again, it's not telling you this, but every time you play this move, they can play this, you know, you lose a piece or something like that, and you never get that feedback. I think that's not very helpful either. So I think having something that could tell you, but then maybe, like you said, maybe you find some friends of yours, or like a lot of chess players, like, you know, use coaches and say, look, the engine's saying this, but I don't quite understand exactly why this is better than X, you know, X, Y, or Z. Can you explain that to me? Or a lot of self-reflection on it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, having a chess engine be a competitor, like just like, hey, playing chess against the computer, I think, you know, is a very good option for people, just because it's like you want to be playing against people who are going to punish you for bad moves. Just as you say. Otherwise, you ain't gonna learn what's right.
Right. Well, you might not want to be punished, but it's probably better for
Yes,
you if
yes,
you do get punished. Yeah,
yes.
exactly. So
But I do think there's this question of like you can be like say an intermediate player and then you play against like the best chess engine there is.
right.
Like that is almost I think there's a time in which there's too big of a gap
Yeah.
where a chess engine just crushes you like immediately. Let's say, I mean, I don't know, in 10 moves or something, and
Oh
you
yeah.
clearly have an untenable position now. Um, and it's really when it gets murky about where you made a mistake, and this is where some of the experience comes in, where it's like when these masters are saying like don't use this until you become a master, like like if you have trouble even identifying what the mistake was or what happened, then it's probably better. It could be better, at least in principle, to say play against a weaker chess engine where you will still lose. You still want to get punished for your worst mistakes, but it's not like every single move you're making, you're like decrementing your like
Yeah.
your winning percentage. I don't know. That's my 2 cents, I guess. On
No, yeah. Actually, let me ask you, sort of on a related note, because I've had these thoughts about this. It's related to the engine, or specifically not using the engine, and maybe you can relate this to like math proofs or math problems. Uh, the value of, say, analyzing a position over, say, a longer period of time, where without using an engine, like you could use moving the pieces around, say, okay, this happens, this my opponent can do this, and not necessarily playing in a game, but like after maybe a position from a person's game, and then trying to figure out what the best move is without using this engine. Um, I guess when is the um, cost benefit of, because that's going to take a lot of time to do,
hmm
and maybe it
hmm
depends on your strength, a player's strength as well, as opposed to. I guess I remember reading some book about how this person became this expert math person, and he didn't have an instructor, but he had this manual, and he basically hand did all the proofs by himself, and then he became this genius or something like
mm,
that. I'll let you react to that a little
sure.
bit.
So I do think there is this sense of like, okay, so let's say you're playing against a chess engine, and they just like, bam, immediately, like you're almost like cutting off the skill development because what you would like to do is analyze the position in some fashion, right? At least like try your hand at it. But it's just like, nope, this is immediately wrong. Okay, nope, that's immediately wrong. Um, and so I do think there is value in kind of practicing the key skill. I mean, that's
Right,
what it's about, right?
right.
Like the key skill, or one of the key skills at least, is analyzing positions. And we do the same after every Go game I've ever played. The
Hmm.
senior player, usually not me, the senior player will offer to like go over the game with me, and we walk through the game,
Yep.
and we do exactly like you say. We stop at a point like, I think this was a mistake. This is an option. That's an option. That's an option. This leads to
Exactly.
that kind of game. This leads to that kind of game, right? And the same thing I'm sure happens so often in chess.
Hmm.
Um, and Personally, I think that is an extremely valuable tool, especially if you have a more experienced player there. Um, at some, you know, it, you're right that there's this kind of cost benefit analysis. Like you can analyze positions to death, and you don't. If there's no one there to say like, well, this is really the better position,
Right.
um, then it's kind of an exercise in futility to some degree. Like you do get experience, but you need that feedback too. So
Right.
I feel like having both is a kind of, they complement each other, right? Like
Right.
it's not like one is bad and the other is good. It's like you really need both of them to form a kind of coherent skill development process. Um, yeah.
Okay. Well, so just to kind of summarize the thought, it's sort of like, let's say here's the typical use. Someone plays a game and they want to see what they did wrong, and maybe because of the result of the game, they can kind of see, oh yeah, here I didn't notice that he was going to take my piece or whatever. And I guess what I'm hearing and kind of what I've thought is that you should spend some time without the assistance of an engine to say, maybe I could have tried this and maybe explore it a little either with your someone or with by yourself. But then it's important to say, okay, well, what does the engine say? Maybe am I in the right track with this line of thought? Um, and so I think it's sort of one of those again, and I think well, just to give you context, there are some people, and I've seen them when I play online, and they'll as soon as we're done with the game, they turn the engine on. They say, "Oh, we should have played this," or "You made a mistake here," or "I made a mistake here." And it's sort of like
Mm.
part of that learning process is sort of the here's what I thought, here's what I didn't see, and if you, I feel like you're cutting that off too early if you turn that if you click the button right
Yeah.
afterwards. But
And
yeah,
well, partly it's the develop. So in any area of expertise, part of the development is the development of kind of metacognitive knowledge. So it's the development, which means like better planning, better monitoring, et cetera. But it also means um, a better understanding of what you know and what you don't know.
okay,
And that's one of the things that kind of gets cut off when you just tell people the answer all the
right,
time. Nope, you're wrong. This one, nope, this one, this one. And so you think that because you saw the chess engine give you the right answer, that now you understand or now you know that that's right and the other one was wrong. But because you haven't spent the time to actually think about it, you don't really. It's just gonna
yeah,
kind of wash over you. And even if you like, at a fundamental level, plays are not correct. Like there is there is correct reasoning and
mm-hmm,
correct contexts. And if
mm,
you don't understand that context, then like a play at, I don't know, c4 at this moment, like, do you know if the pieces are slightly different, if c4 is still going to be good? No, it might be terrible.
right,
Understanding the context is really important, and that's what the chess engine doesn't give you.
yeah,
um,
yeah. No,
yeah.
perfect. Well, let's keep moving here. This is a great conversation, but I
Sorry,
also
I'm taking too long.
Ben is he's 12 hours. It's nighttime for him, so I want him to be able to get some sleep tonight. So the next one here is called the Woodpecker method, and just to give it a little context, all the chess players are going to know it. There is a book called the Woodpecker method, but basically in the book, the author, who is a grandmaster, says. You have this set of problems, and it's typically like 1,000 problems, starting from easy to difficult, and then you go through them over, say, a couple months or whatever the case is, and then you take a couple days break, and then you cut the time in half, and you go over the same set of problems again, and then you do this 7 times. There was also another author who called this the 7 circles. So people uh, say, I guess from a chess player, being able to pattern recognition and seeing patterns, using patterns is kind of a big part about chess. And so, but does this method itself, I guess, is there more than one way to skin a cat, or should everybody be doing the woodpecker method, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, so like every answer, I feel like I'm somewhere in between. Initially, when I read about this, I thought this was a kind of a weird idea. But the so the things that I like about it, one is that, just as you said, like recognizing chess patterns is a huge component of chess skill. And I presume that these are problems that like were specifically designed, like these are certain fundamental patterns that you need to know. And that in almost any area of expertise, we were talking about math earlier,
Mm-hmm.
there's research talking about how it's like, kids to be good at math, they don't need to be like, you don't need to be hitting like 90% of the problems right, 90% of your like basic fundamental, arithmetic and multiplication division. You need to be 99%. You need to
Yeah.
be 100%. You need to always get that right,
Yep.
and the same is true in chess, where a number of these things, it's like that needs to be automatic,
Mm-hmm.
needs to be coming up so fast. And so I think that general idea is sound. However, the method itself seems a little odd to me. So you start out with very long um, delays between problem sets, and
Well,
then they get
yes.
shorter, right?
Basically, I'll give you an example. Like they would say, take 10 minutes per problem. And so this is going to
Okay.
take you a while to do it, assuming you spend a couple hours a day on it. And then the
Okay.
next time, instead of 10 minutes, you take 5 minutes. And then
Oh, so these
the
are like the time allotted for you to solve the problem.
correct. And then
Okay.
the final one, you're supposed to really be able to do it in 5 seconds or 10 seconds and get through the whole 1,000 problems in one day. Um,
And are these problems? You said these problems were ordered from easiest to
Easiest to the
hardest,
most difficult, yes.
and they're always in the same order, or
Well, it depends. Some people. So the first person who wrote about it was a player named Michael Delamaza, and he basically said you have to come up with your 1,000 problems. But he didn't sell like the set. He basically said this is the
I see.
method. Come up with the 1,000 problems, and then you do this to the 1,000 problems. Uh, Later, a grandmaster wrote this book, The Woodpecker Method, which basically had the same training method, but he said, "Here's the 1,000 problems I used."
Right.
And
Right.
so now people generally just say, "Oh, with these basic patterns, I'm going to woodpecker it," and then that means they're going to use that method to repeat
Gotcha.
it
Gotcha.
and do it. So
So,
it's become kind of
it
cultish to some people.
gotcha. I mean, I can see the attraction. Like, um, I would not do them in the same order.
Okay.
That's a big mistake. Um, I mean that's one thing I'm pretty confident of. Uh, and what happens? So what happens is when you're solving these problems, you want to be you want to mimic what's going to happen in the kind of game, right? In a
Right.
game, you don't know what's going to happen next, and this is the same thing. There's tons of research on interleaving and math problem
Oh,
solving,
yes.
and what happens is if people already know what kind of problem is coming next, it's obviously easier for them. I know a multiplication problem is coming. Well, I have my multiplication algorithm already
Hmm.
charged and ready to go. And so if you give me a division problem and if you just start throwing me at me like different kinds of problems or like a factoring problem in math and then something that I don't know like a difference of squares or different kinds of factoring, whatever. Um, this is what keeps the mind on, our minds on our toes.
Right.
And so what happens is if they're all in the same order and you do it again, then part of how you are solving the problem is that your brain is starting to associate the order that it comes in or what came
Ah.
before, what came after, what came before, like, oh, I know that the next one has something to do with this. It's a little trick.
So it's less
It's a little
about
trick like
like, here's the chess pattern. Oh, I recognize this chess pattern. Here's the method I need to use to solve it, as opposed to,
yes.
oh, this is number 755 in the order. That answer is this.
Right. And I mean, and it's not the case that it's like you're exclusively in one or the other,
Right.
but as you're solving it, like and especially when you're doing the same thing over and over again, like your brain is learning all the time, right? It's always trying to pick up patterns, and any
Right.
pattern that it can hold on to, it will. And so
Interesting.
if
Interesting.
if the previous, like you've already done this 4 times, the fifth time you do it, it's like, oh yeah, this is the one. So I would definitely, if you're doing this, I would definitely be setting it up so that you're seeing random problems from the set. And you,
Okay.
you can start off by like, okay, I'm going to do a new set of 7 problems, and then maybe I'll see that those same 7 problems like one more time, and then after that, I'm going to start incorporating it into my like larger
The
set
greater.
of 1,000 into my total 1,000, and now they're being thrown at me randomly, and I don't know what's coming.
So
Um,
the repetition of the patterns is a good idea, but the ordering, I'm just trying to summarize because I think
yes.
most woodpecker advocates kind of do it in the same order every time. So that
Hmm.
that's not isn't necessarily helpful because of what you're saying is that the patterns that you're or the method you're using is not necessarily going to simulate or practice what you're going to see at the chessboard, which is the specific piece patterns that people are
Right.
trying to learn.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing to consider is when you were first talking about delays, I was thinking about delays between sessions.
Oh yeah.
So, and so what you'd like to do is start off with shorter delays, and then grow the length of those delays over
Yes.
time. Just basic like spaced out learning,
Hmm. Oh yeah.
which
And
makes your brain forget a little bit, and then it works harder to remember, and then that strengthens the memory trace.
well, that's
So,
actually,
um,
and we didn't put this on the list because there's a very popular program out there, and I'm a big advocate for it called Chessable. I don't know if you've seen that in any of the things you've been looking up, but basically it does that. Like you'll learn a specific, say, opening or tactic, and then it'll first, in the first 4 hours, it will pull it back up and say, okay,
yeah,
time to solve it again, and then it'll be 8 hours, a day, 5 days, and again, you can customize that too. And what I used to argue, because before I met you, I looked at this stuff and in trying to improve myself. So this whole spaced learning, um, and I guess I want to speak to this because I've gotten into arguments with people where I'll tell them, look, because some people, the problem with the software, it's not a problem, but it's a motivating part, is they get XP for experience points for doing the problems. So people will custom the spacing so that they're only an hour apart, and then they'll get a million XP in a day, whereas a person doing it the right way would only get like 5,000 or something like that. And I
right,
kind of was arguing with them, look, because I wanted to help them, and partly because I wanted to, guys, this isn't really helping you, because at some point you're just, 2 + 2 = 4. If you keep saying that,
right.
you're just gonna know that that's the pattern. So is that well? So here's the question, I guess, to be a little more direct. Is that I would, and they would argue, well, maybe it's inefficient, but it's not hurting me. So that's the question: is it detrimental for this? And this is a little separate than the woodpecker method itself, but more on the whole spacing. Like you said, you want to extend the intervals where you're not seeing, maybe after you've gotten quite a bit of experience with it, maybe you see it like 3 months later, um,
Right.
and as
Hmm.
opposed to an hour later for the next week or so.
So one of the huge kind of main findings that you see is that the the delay. So let's say you take two tests, and which is kind of what's going on here, right? You see a problem now and you see a problem later, and the delay in between those two times is intimately related to how long you are going to remember this after the last test for. So the
Interesting.
longer that this delay is, the longer you are going to remember it for. And there's been really a huge discussion among psychologists. I am not among these people who are doing this research. I'm just reading it.
Okay.
But there's been a huge discussion about like what is the optimal spacing, and really, um, if you look at how our school is set up and these things, you see that, hey, this is really not a good idea to, people will take tests and then they'll like never return to the material again, or you end up cramming stuff together. You kind of end up kind of doing a bunch all at once, which is exactly what you're describing with these, problems. I'm just doing it, every
Right.
hour it's going to come up, it's going to come up. And I think some people trick themselves into thinking like, oh, well, like I focused really hard on these set of problems and I like did a good like focus session. Um, and so now it's in my brain. But that is a complete misunderstanding of what's going on. What happens is that you get the feeling of what's called fluency. So the
Hmm.
answer comes to mind very quickly the next time because you're only separating an hour apart, an hour apart, hour
Right.
apart. So it's always coming up to mind, and it makes you think that you have understood this and learned it, and it's going to stay in your memory. But that is because our brains don't actually know when we are going to remember something and when we aren't. And so there are lots of things that we think, we use other judgments. And so one of those judgments is like, well, how quickly can I pull it up? But because you've crammed, you've actually not strengthened your kind of the connections between
Right.
your kind of your associations in your mind between the problem and the answer. So yes,
So what?
delays very important, very
Yeah.
important to delay things and it. I mean, the problem is that when you delay things, people think, well, I kind of forgot that, and now they're frustrated
Right.
because it seems like they didn't learn it, right? But the thing
Right.
is, when you forget something and then the next time you learn it, so let's say you forgot the solution. Oh man, was that a waste? No, no, because uh, storage in your
Hmm.
memory is unlimited, basically. It's the retrieval process that is the problem. And so really, that answer is sitting somewhere in your brain, but your brain can't basically find it again. So what you're doing is you can learn it more quickly the second time, and the memory for it is going to be stronger the second
Right.
time around. So it's not a waste. It's you really, like, forgetting is part of remembering, and so
Right.
letting things be forgotten um, um, strengthens it when it comes to remembering it again, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. But yeah.
By the way, guys,
uh,
Ben's got some great videos on a few of these concepts, and I'll link those in a playlist at the end of the video. So just if you're like, oh, what's interleaving or what's space learning, I'll point you to Ben's videos later. No, perfect. And the other thought that you had when you have spacing between, say, the first time you learn something or the second or third time, and then the next time, you might have other experiences in between that you can associate with it. Maybe you played a game where like, oh, I use this tactic, and I think is that part of the that you're
yes.
it's almost like you're it's kind of like when you're on a computer. Tell me if I'm getting this right. On a computer, and I'm trying to find a photo I took that I downloaded, and instead of in searching, they all have these weird names and something. Maybe I'll remember the date, so somewhere that's in there. But I could also just put it in a folder called whatever it is that that I want to remember it for. Photos of my son playing soccer, and so whenever I want to find the specific photo, I can click on it, and in a way, our brain, by forgetting and then coming back to it and relearning it, we're adding that context. Is that about kind of got some idea thought or
uh,
part right, partly right?
yeah, I mean, I think yeah. So um, there is this that what you're talking about is almost like a different kind of thing, which
Oh,
is
okay, okay,
associating memories with other things. So in that case, you took a folder or kind of a
right.
overall category, and you associated this picture with the overall
Oh, okay.
category. Um, and that is important too. And I
Oh, okay,
think
but it's not quite what you're
what
talking about. Okay.
one of the effect, well, yeah, I mean, one of the effects that you see when you're talking about the spacing, exactly like you mentioned, you have a relevant experience in between the session, or before the next session, or whatever. um, you want to try to maximize that. I mean, there's no way of being like, well, how do I play a game such that this problem naturally comes up and I'm confronted with it, right? But there is a moment. There are kind of right moments, or so if you talk to elementary or middle school teachers, like kind of teachable moments. There are these perfect times for something, and like if you played a game, and a certain kind of problem or a certain kind of tactic could have helped you in that game. Well, oh man, if you found out right after that game that this tactic could have helped you, or you solve a problem relevant to that, man, you make this connection between the two. If you can make that
Right.
connection, that's really helpful. um,
Okay.
I don't know how to do that, but that
Yeah.
making that connection, if you can make those connections, that's very, very
So we
important.
kind of combined a few things there with the woodpecker method, but in a way, a woodpecker method is a method of spacing, and I think
Hmm.
maybe a way we can optimize it for those of you who are woodpecker or seven circles advocates is interleaving or mixing up the problems and not doing them in the same order. Now, I probably lost half of you who who do that, but hopefully you stuck around, and you're going, maybe we'll try it, and maybe you'll find that you're a little more effective with the woodpecker method. Okay, let's go to the next one. And Ben, this is a great conversation. I'm hoping you're enjoying it as well. But this
I love
next
it. Yeah.
one, it's not really. I don't think it's controversial. It's but so maybe part of the discussion is maybe how to best go about this. But it's the study of master games. So these are lucky with chess, and I think in Go. I'm not sure if they have a way of notating where the moves were, so people can look at what was played in the past. And
Hmm.
so and one of the good or one of the practices that's advocated is to study these games. Obviously, these are the best players who've ever lived, or at least people who have mastered or have a high proficiency in the game. So we should study how we do it. What do you think? Or what's
So
your first
I
thought?
mean, I think this kind of parallels the game engine discussion a little bit, in that, like, you have these examples of great play, um, how do we leverage this to help us?
Yeah.
And with the Masters games, I think there's actually a benefit. I presume that there's commentary, especially maybe for some of the older games or the more famous games,
Yes.
where you you can kind of walk through the game and kind of read this commentary, which is a lot better than just saying walking through a chess engine played game
Right.
without commentary. Um, and so I think the basic method is kind of similar to using chess engines, where ideally you don't just want to be like, I'm going to sit down and study a master game. Well, I'm just going to walk through, oh, they played there. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. Oh, they played there.
Okay.
Without you like first trying to figure out where to go next. If I was a if you were to be like, Ben, sit down, you have these masters games, you want to become awesome at chess, what do? I would sit down and I would adopt the role of one of the players, and I would try to like do some kind of like best guess kind of
Yeah.
moves.
Yep.
And I think this takes a lot of time. To go through a game like that is non-trivial. And I mean, you can have the commentary come up as you get to a certain moment in the game, but you ideally you want to read that commentary after you try it for yourself,
Okay.
because again, what happens is that you read the commentary and you're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Yep. And then you move on without critically examining. I mean, what happens is that if you get to pick the thing first and you have your own reasons, or at least a reason or some rationale, and then you go to the commentary, and then it's like, oh, well, now you have you have your thoughts and you have the commentary, and you get to see what's different. If you just read the commentary, you don't get to see that contrast. It's just, hey, commentary's right there. That must be correct because I'm a lot worse chess player than they are. I just accept what they say is true. And I mean, obviously, you want to learn from what they're saying, but
Right.
you want to notice what they're saying too. And that's why I think it's important to do the thing first,
Okay.
to kind of pick your own ideas and have your own ideas first, because that's going to help you notice what is different and what is important about what the experts are saying about this move.
And I think so. We call that either guess the move, or we call it solitary chess. So a lot of people do that, and I advocate it on. I made a video about it on this channel, which I'll link also later for you guys. But I agree. So I guess the one method that one master proposed, and I think could have some value, and you could tell me, is you'll take games from either a specific player, or more relevant is a specific opening. So an opening sequence that start with these 5-10 moves, and then they'll get like say a dozen or 100 of these games. And now with computers, you can replay them really quickly, and then they'll go
Mm-hmm.
through them fairly quickly, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes per game, maybe without and probably without commentary. But let's assume that this player may know a bit about this opening, but they want to see some ideas. Um,
Mm.
One of the former world champions said he used to study 10,000 games a day, and he would basically, because of his skill level, he would stop when he saw what was he was looking for. But again, that might
Right.
be the key, is that he's at that level, but
Right.
the average level. So basically, the idea, you're just backing up a little, getting a little tongue tied, going through these games quickly, and they're all played by masters in the specific, but with a specific theme in mind, whether that be an opening structure or some type of tactic. What do you think about that?
Um, so I like the idea of kind of clustering together related um, games, so games that maybe share an opening, because especially if you're studying that opening, but um, because it lets you, especially if you are a little bit weaker, maybe if you had seen these games separately, you wouldn't necessarily have made the connections in your head about like, oh, this is the same opening. Oh, they did that move, and that was the difference. And
Okay.
right at move 5 or whatever it is. Um, but this idea of speed studying them, like it almost sounds like that um, grandmaster you were talking about, or like it almost sounded like they were looking, like they were searching for interesting moves. So it's like they'd already seen a bunch of these variations
Right, right.
before, and they were kind of like, I'm gonna like quickly go through the games because like I'm trying to find something new or different,
Okay.
which is different than say a weaker player saying like, well, I'm going to learn, I'm going to learn all these kind of three different strategy things. That there's something. Um, so let's say you have uh, 3 or 4 games that are all related to the same opening. Now, what you could do is you could pull up one game, play through, pull up the next game, play through, pull up the next game, play through, and you can do this kind of fast or slow, whatever you want. But there is something about having things together in the same visual space that seems to be important for people because you can play like what I mean what it makes me think of is playing both games together and seeing where they diverge you're seeing both games
Right.
and
Right.
you're playing each move, each following move, and I think that could be a powerful way
Interesting.
of even if you were doing this fast, which I'm not sure if fast is really the best way to do it, but even
Okay.
if you were doing it fast, you can kind of see like what the global picture is. Like, oh,
Right.
this right one, like white has control of the center here, but this other one, like, white's kind of on this left side and has
Right.
developed on in this way. And so even if you don't know every specific move that made, where the divergence was and you can kind of see the pattern. I think that could be a pretty interesting
Interesting.
approach or a valuable
Yeah,
approach.
and so the key there, and that's just something that I've whenever, sometimes in especially in the end game or in openings too, you'll see, well, in this position they played X first, and then in a similar but not the same position, Y gets played, and
Hmm.
it's sort of that. Those are those moments when I'm talking to other players or when I'm looking. It's like, well, why was, and I guess that's the question, is why is why was that played there? And in some cases with chess, because patterns and structures, it's like, oh, they're interchangeable, and then this master just preferred it that way because of whatever.
Right.
And
Right.
sometimes it's like, no, there's a specific reason, because if you play this first, it allows this, whereas if you play this first, it doesn't allow this. So you, in this
Hmm.
position, you want to do that. And I think that comparison idea is not a new one, but I think it's one that chess players maybe don't do enough of. The
Hmm.
method I was saying, the master who proposed it is sort of saying you're just going to sort of absorb the patterns, and I felt it was a little. I don't want to be too disrespectful, because obviously this person is a very strong, much stronger player than I am, but a little hokey to me. So it's a
Yeah. I mean, I agree that if you're just kind of like, I mean, there is, pattern recognition is huge component in not just in chess, in almost every domain that I can think of. Pattern recognition is really important. But uh, but just thinking that you're just gonna kind of absorb patterns just through kind of repetitively seeing these things like over and over again, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of that as well.
okay. It might be more of
Uh,
a case of, like you said, being more actively involved with guessing the move, and then doing that where you're seeing similar patterns. Now you're
yeah,
getting that feedback and that contrasting. Okay, the pattern works here, but it doesn't work here in this particular
right,
game. So
right,
that might be
right.
more.
I
It
mean,
is more time consuming, right? But it is,
yeah, it is more time consuming. I mean, there's a lot of cases in which doing the more effortful thing is better. I mean, sometimes obviously you can spend your effort in a wasteful way, but
right.
if you want to learn something deeply, often that just requires you to put in a lot of mental effort. Um, I can see, there is like, I think there's a world in which I could see seeing a bunch of similar openings, or a bunch of like the same openings that evolved in different ways, like just as like I've never seen this opening before. Let's just run through, and I already know how to. I'm at least an intermediate player,
Okay.
so I already know kind of basically how things go. Let's just run through like 50 of these just to see like, what's the overall picture like 20 moves in or something,
Right.
or
Right.
whatever it is. And I think that could be a good start, like a good
Right.
like, oh,
Just to get
okay,
kind of the
like
landscape.
yeah, this is the landscape. This is what we're talking about. Okay, now let's dig in deep about certain areas.
Okay,
Um,
interesting. Oh, this is great. Well, let's keep moving because I think
yeah,
this is excellent. We're about halfway through, guys, so hopefully we'll. But I think a lot
sorry.
of the we laid a lot of the groundwork, so some of the concepts will probably come up again. But okay, the next one here. Um, this one's actually memorizing games. So not just studying the game, but memorizing it so you can play it. Like if someone said, "Hey, show me this game between these two masters," someone could actually play through there. And the idea, maybe similar to studying the master games, is that by taking the effort to memorize it, you're taking in those patterns and understanding the strategies behind it. But does it really? I mean, is it really an efficient use of time? I guess is partly my question.
So this was one that I think it would like I think it's cool. Don't get me wrong, to know like a famous game and be able to play it. But I think mostly this I would put in this in a waste of time bucket. Like I
Okay.
don't think it's as valuable as a lot of the other techniques that we've been talking about.
Okay.
Um, and uh, and it's not it I again it kind of depends on how you go about it. But if you make the goal to memorize the game, uh, well, you're going to try to do that in the most efficient way possible, and it's not like memorizing the game requires you to understand the game really.
Mm.
um, you see this uh, this is almost kind of a distinction between what's called like procedural knowledge and conceptual knowledge. So what happens sometimes, and now these are related, so the better you get at one, the better you get at another. But what happens sometimes is you have students that get better at following procedures, or you can test them and they can do XYZ thing. But then when you give them a certain kind of question that asks for critical thinking in some fashion, or tests their concepts of like their physics concepts, let's say, then they just fall apart completely. Um, there was I have a really well, one of my older videos is research that looked at a bunch of students solving physics problems, and these students in preparation for these tests would solve like 2,000 physics problems.
Mm.
But then they just gave them it's basically a questionnaire that just asked them questions about how physics forces work. And these students don't do any better than they did before they solved all these problems. I mean, they've gotten
Huh.
very effective at solving these problems. I think something similar is going on if you say memorize a bunch of games. It's I wouldn't expect that to be highly correlated with chess skill necessarily. It's like you're learning about chess, but you're not necessarily learning to play chess. And you're not faced with the same decisions that you are faced when you're actually playing. And so I think if you want to do this, I think it's cool. I think it's interesting,
Yeah.
and it could be valuable, in a small way. But I would not say that I would not advocate this for being like a main thing for you to do. This is something that if you enjoy doing, you could do a little bit of, but I wouldn't say like, yeah,
Okay.
low
Okay.
priority, I would say.
I think fairly similar to what I thought, but I have a lot of close friends who enjoy doing this, so keep doing it. But maybe,
Yeah,
obviously we have finite amount of time that we have to spend our chess on, and maybe this shouldn't be one of the priorities. Maybe we'll classify it that way.
yeah. And I mean, the game is supposed to be fun, so you should do the things that you enjoy about it.
Exactly.
But if you're trying
Exactly.
to improve, I don't think it's going to be super helpful.
Okay. Sounds good. Fair enough. Next one. Solving composed problems. So this is one I have to be open-minded about because I do enjoy this. And so these are problems that are not from actual games. They're not game situations, although sometimes they are created to simulate game situations, but are more created to the aesthetic aspect of chess, the beauty and logic behind the sequence of the solution is sort of what it's judged on. So the general idea is that um, by solving these problems, you're practicing skills like calculation, calculating different moves, but you're also tapping into, well, sometimes you're going to have a move that doesn't look right, but it is right. And when you have more experience solving these problems, you're going to, um, develop that skill and have that computer like
Mm.
omniscience, I guess you could say, as opposed to it being a standard pattern. So, anyways, whatever. Tell me what you think about it.
So I was like, I think in a few sentences, you've actually made me come around a little bit. I was gonna say that this is probably a low priority because you use the word for aesthetic purposes, and so that made me thinking like oh, isn't this a beautiful mate?
Right,
Like
right,
in a certain number of
exactly.
moves.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and I mean, I love that kind of stuff too, like viewing the elegance of something,
Right.
Um, but there's a couple of things that I think could be valuable about it.
Okay.
One is that um, you have this class of problems in the problem solving literature known as insight problems, and the whole point of them is that uh, it's not like they require a series of steps. Really, they require a change in your perspective. And
Mhm.
if you don't get that change in perspective, you don't solve the problem ever. You can
Right.
bang your head
Right.
against the wall for quite a long time. I'm terrible at these problems, by the way. Um, but uh, the uh, solving kind of problems that aren't in-game problems or composed, through some other kind of, they follow the rules of chess, obviously, but they're not realistic
Right.
problems, can kind of knock you out of your kind of traditional way of thinking. So, you're so used to seeing the same situations pop up over and over again, and this can kind of open up the way you think a little bit to say, oh, well, it doesn't always have to be that way. Um, the other thing is, if you this comes up in, say, like training pilots, I think, or training anyone like astronauts. You know, realistically, unless you are on like Apollo 13 or something, realistically, like something like not all the things are not going to go wrong, and you are like your flight, let's say, is probably going to be fine. Say if you're a commercial airline pilot, your flight's going to be fine,
Right.
but you don't want to train for the things that are fine all the time, right? Like you are training for the kind of rare things that happen. And so like the context of training is not an exact replica of the context of performance. So when you're
Mhm.
training, you want to be challenging yourself on things that might be far more rare to come up with than in real games. Now, there's some tension there because like if you start doing things that like, well, that just never happens, and like it's never gonna like occur, and even that general principle is just no one cares,
Right.
like
Right.
it's never gonna come up in a game, uh, and you don't really know which ones are which. Do you? I mean, at the end of the day, no one is gonna say like, well, this kind of problem it never comes up, and this kind of problem maybe will come
Right.
up like 0.001% of the time or something. Um, so I would say like there's some value to it. I would say like I wouldn't spend the bulk of my time doing
Okay.
it, but I think doing some of it is probably a good thing.
Okay.
Um,
So it could be helpful, but don't you know? The way I look at it is, spend most of your time solving the types of problems that you're more likely to see at the chessboard.
that's what,
But
yeah, that's
that's
yes,
kind of
yeah.
a general principle of any type of training,
Yeah,
right? Is to
yeah, I would say that that's true. Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So
yeah.
I could keep doing it without feeling guilty. Although, like I said, if you guys enjoyed everything about, I mean, unless you're a professional chess player, this is a hobby and it's something you enjoy. And I spend a lot of time on it. It is a hobby, but I spend a lot of time. Probably my wife says a little too much, but so keep doing them. But good. Like I said, I'm not gonna. I do enjoy these problems, and but it is something I guess that. that we don't want to necessarily prioritize. Okay, this next one actually kind of related, and we've talked about this a little, so we don't necessarily need to repeat it. Is the speed of solving puzzles. So the context behind this is that there are a couple modes on some of the popular chess websites. And one is called a puzzle rush, and the other one is called puzzle storm. But basically, how many puzzles can you solve in a limited amount of time? And so they're very easy puzzles, and then everyone likes to tweet about how many they did on this particular thing. So there's that, and then there's more difficult problems, and someone could spend say 20, 30 minutes to find the solution, or maybe not even find a solution. So again, it's maybe it's a case of a little bit of both. But is there, I guess, is there one that's better than the other, or what are the different skills that are being trained, and what do we need to be cautious about? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I mean, you gave me a key piece of information there, which was that the problems in the puzzle rush are pretty easy to solve, and I think like if they if these are at a certain level should be kind of automatic, like any good player should be seeing the right move kind of puzzles, then I do think there is some advantage. Like you basically you already know the answer, kind of like if you had unlimited time, you would solve it, no problem. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to make this response more automatic, and I mean I think I mean you again run into this question of like what is causing automaticity in your responses, and is going fast like does that result in being fast? But I would say that in general that seems like a reasonable thing to do, to kind of reinforce these basic patterns over and over again. The slower puzzle solving, to me, that I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of chess you play, but in a standard chess game, it seems like you are faced with maybe not exactly the same situation, but it's more analogous to a slower puzzle solving situation.
Right.
Now, I mean, so I mean, spending 20, 30 minutes on a single puzzle seems like a long time to me. I don't know.
And I
But
think it's just to remember the context. A game, a
yeah,
person could have 2 hours, and if
right,
a particular position could mean losing the game or winning the game,
right.
and
That's
so
true.
maybe
Yeah.
part of it is understanding when, and maybe that's kind of off the topic a little, but understanding when it's the time to spend that time. Well, I guess that's part
Yeah.
of the question. Is it's sort of like say runners, a runner or like a race might be a 5 mile race, but often runners train at 10 miles, to get their endurance.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, I don't may not have, I can't spend 30 minutes on every single move, but maybe
Right.
the skills that I'm learning, spending say 20 minutes on a puzzle, that skill I'm developing might come in handy in that. Well, I guess
I
that's
mean,
part of the question. Because some
I mean,
people
I
say
think
never
that's
spend that much time. I do have like coaches and other masters say you never spend more than 15 minutes on a puzzle because you'll never do that in a game.
I mean, I think part of the issue is if you spend that long, maybe you don't know what you're doing,
Like
and
maybe
if
the
you don't
puzzle's
know
too
what
hard.
you're doing,
Okay.
pardon,
Oh, maybe
like
it's too hard for you.
like it's too hard for you. Yeah, and so basically, like you're flailing around, like again, it depends on where you are in this kind of expertise trajectory.
Oh yeah.
So, um, if you are spending that time and you are not figuring it out yet, then yeah, maybe this is a sign that you just aren't ready for that kind of puzzle yet.
Okay.
And maybe you wouldn't even necessarily understand the answer if you saw it to some degree. Um,
Okay.
and so you can kind of, you know, I, I guess on the one hand, it is training you to uh, kind of maintain your stamina, maintain your focus, even when you don't know. It's a very, very hard problem. I
Right.
certainly don't want to discourage people from solving hard problems, but
Right.
what happens? I mean, chess. I mean, any of these games, they have search spaces that are massive, right? I mean, for
Right.
humans certainly, um, and so just wandering around without feeling like you can get a hold of anything is
Okay.
not very helpful. So directed searching and kind of wise searching where you feel like, okay, if I move here, I can see a path down this way, I can see a path down that way. You know, that that kind of searching I think is useful. But
Okay.
it reminds me a little bit of yeah. I mean, I guess it's just it can be overwhelming. And so I think one thing to keep in mind is just to solve the right level of problems for your
Yeah.
skill. And if you find yourself always spending a super long time solving problems, maybe scale it back a little bit. And if you find yourself like solving them maybe more quickly, or always getting the right answer, you want to be getting things wrong sometimes, and you want to be getting things like there isn't a good percentage
Yeah.
of times that that you can kind of shoot for like 80% right. That's probably in the ballpark, but um, just be aware, I guess, of the dangers on either side.
I think with this and a lot of the chess training methods we're talking about, it's a lot about self awareness and kind of knowing. I mean, some people use coaches and instructors to help with this guidance, but I think it's a matter of because I used to be I'm going to solve this until it's solved, and like you said, I think sometimes I was just flailing in the dark, sort of, and just trying to
Mm,
guess almost. Whereas now I'm sort of at a yeah. If I'm getting 99% of them right, maybe I should up the difficulty. And if I'm only getting, if I can't solve half of them right, then these are maybe a little too hard, and maybe I need to wait a little before I.
yeah.
And that's in a way kind of where the spacing might come in, because maybe you see a problem that's too hard, you try it, and you say, okay, this is too hard for me, and then you come back to it maybe 2 months later, and maybe you have some key knowledge or experience that would make that problem easier in the future. So, but no, that's very good, because I used to maybe tend towards that. No, I got to solve it. It's part of my self worth is as a chess player is
Right.
tied into this, and I've obviously kind of evolved from that point of view. But I think some people might still have that. So, um, okay, good. Okay, we got a couple more here. We're caught up a little on the time, Ben. I hope you're not too
I'm
tired
I'm
yet.
I'm doing great. I'm doing good.
Okay, awesome. I'm really enjoying this conversation. The next one is competitive play. And so, for most people, I know I'm speaking from the point of view in the United States, but I know my friends in Europe also is the case. Oftentimes, we play in these weekend tournaments where we'll play 5 or 6 games over 2 or 3 days. And that, like I mentioned, these games could last 3, 4, 5 hours a piece. And so they're very tiring, but they're a lot of fun. Typically, it's also a time to reunite maybe with some of our friends across the that we haven't seen
Yeah.
in a while. But I also think that personally, and I think generally that, and again, part of my context is that these are people who are trying to get better at chess. Who want, because there's a lot of people who don't want to play in tournaments, they just enjoy chess. But I'm talking about more people who want to like get better at chess, maybe get a higher ranking, maybe eventually move up the ladder in terms of their title, masters and stuff like
Hmm.
that. um, what is the role of competitive play, and is there a sweet spot in terms of too much versus too little? What do you think?
Yeah. So I think that the first thing is that if you want to be a competitive player, you got to play competitively on a certain level. Like, y- I mean, uh, you have to practice the skill that you're trying to get better at, and there's really no better way than engaging in competitive play. You have the stress of it. You have the realistic time limits. You have other players who are pushing you, to your limits. And I think my guess would be that if you see um, if you look at the history of chess, and you would probably see that, you know, a lot of players got better through playing other really good players, right?
Mhm.
Like there's a certain, the community and this synergistic aspect of like people pushing each other forward in terms of new ideas and new techniques. Um, that said, I think, you know, you mentioned the fatigue as being one thing. So it's like
Right.
a game that you're playing at the end of the day. You know, it's your, I don't know, you know, is it, you say 3 or 4 matches a day?
Two a day typically,
Or two a day, 2 a day. Oh, okay, okay. So that's not so bad.
but over a
But
weekend, yeah. Yep.
over a weekend, you know, by the end, like there's just a certain amount of like tiredness. I feel like
Yep.
and your brain is swimming. I mean, I think it's a good kind of tiredness. Um, but I think it practically speaking, it seems hard to overdo competitive play because, you know, these opportunities only come up every so often. You
Right.
can't sit down and do it anytime you want. I mean, I guess if you're playing online chess, I guess you could sit and kind of play
Right.
competitively. Um, but uh, there's this other factor, which is uh, if you're not reflecting on your play, then
Hmm.
the competitive play is probably not doing that much or doing as much as it could for
Okay.
you, because what in an ideal world you would be reviewing your games for
Hmm.
one, again, or revisiting certain kind of opening patterns or maybe key mistakes you made, um, but also continuing to grow your skill set,
Right.
and to some degree, if you just leave it up to competitive play, it's kind of like, well, it's a roll of the dice, you know, like
Yeah.
what kind of openings are people playing against you, or you know, what are their responses, and you're kind of leaving it up to other people to introduce you to new things. And
Right.
there's another kind of analogy to research on mathematics and problem solving, which is uh, there's interleaving between you know, there's the kind of interleaving we talked about earlier of like, you know, throwing random problems at you. But there's also a kind of interleaving, which is, you know, you have kids solve problems and then you have them look at, say, worked examples. So you have basically kids solve problems and then study problems. Um, and the combination of the two, like alternating between the two, leads to pretty strong learning outcomes, more than either one alone. And and my yeah, my thinking here is that really, you know, if you're playing competitive play or competitive games, and then you maybe are doing some training or studying, uh, and you're kind of expanding your repertoire of openings or what have you, and then you get to play again, right? And you kind of come back and also study again and play again. This kind of back and forth, I think, is I think both it is engaging because you're not
Yep.
always doing the same thing over and over again, but I think it's also productive from a learning standpoint. That you're going to end up in a better place than if you were just like, no, I'm just competing every single day, every single time that I possibly can, or alternatively studying. Like if you just, I'm just studying, and you never play. Um,
Yeah.
I think that both of those are a kind of paths away from the ideal path.
Okay. No, that sounds about kind of what I was thinking. I do know a lot of especially young players who just they play every week. They play a couple times, and I'm talking about the tournament type
Hmm.
thing, not just playing online for fun or relaxation. And I think they improve a lot. But then that could be a case where they have a coach who looks at their games with them and helps them to say, okay, here's what you could have done differently, and here's some exercises you can do to improve that aspect. So I think it's that whole and you said this in one of your videos, that whole practice and then feedback loop sort of is
Hmm.
or the cycle is what's important in this. But yeah, I definitely and I know my viewers who play in tournaments. Um, there's an interesting thing ever since the pandemic. A lot of players, when I first started playing, which is around 2000, or playing competitively. I mean, I learned as a child way back when, but it was all over the board, and there were places to play online, but you got you played more in person, and now with the pandemic and things like that, people are being introduced to the game online, and so
Right.
I'll talk to friends of mine that I meet online, and they'll say, "I've never played in an over the board tournament," and in a way, and then what happens is they go and they play, and all of a sudden they do quite poorly, and I said, "Hey, that's part of the process," and it's a totally, but they're good at playing online, but they're not necessarily they that stress and that performance aspect
Hmm.
of it. I think is an important part if you want to grow. Well, I mean, if you want to grow as a competitive chess player, I guess that depends on people's goals again and what they want.
Yeah, I totally agree that, yeah, having, that uh, stakes have kind of an interesting, they in certain situations the high stakes of a competitive play can focus someone,
Mm.
right, and kind of get them in the right zone and headspace. And then in other cases, it can cause like choking behavior, where you've kind of the stakes are kind of too high, and you feel like if you lose, bad things happen, and yeah, there's some awesome studies looking at CEO pay with
Oh,
this, where like you start paying CEOs absurd amounts of money. I mean, there's really more of a tiny laboratory study, but you start, raising the stakes a lot in very simple tasks, and people start screwing up because they're just is too high. They're not, they're afraid of losing.
ah,
But but a little bit of stress, and I think getting used to that stress of competitive play is really important. Obviously, if you're gonna play competitively.
right.
Um,
Okay. Couple more here, and no, that was great. Um, so this is one I'm not sure. So, like I said, a lot of people were introduced to chess online as opposed to, like
right.
I said, I grew up with it. We had a chessboard in my family, and my dad was like, "Okay, let me show you how to play chess," or it was more like, "Dad, show me how to play chess," and then you learn how to play with a board. And then when I first got my chess book, when I first started saying I want to learn how to play chess, like more seriously, I had a book, and then I had my board, and I would move the pieces, and I'd be like, "Oh, let me move the pieces
Right.
back," and oh shoot, I got that position wrong. But now with online, a lot of people are seeing the game for the first time, and a majority of the time in two dimensions instead of three. And so, and again, for the purposes of someone who's trying to be, go to tournaments and play in person, what is I don't know if there's any research on this, or what is the general thought of practicing using a physical board, whether it be doing your puzzles and setting them up on a physical board, or if you're playing online, setting up a physical board next to you. Again, not to,
Hmm.
to analyze with it, but to make the moves as if you were
Right.
simulating playing over the board. What are your
Do
thoughts
you
on
play? Do you set up a board when you play online?
when I have yeah, in my long, so I do play like I do enjoy the blitz chess occasionally. In
Right.
which case I don't, but I'm in a couple training groups where we have longer tournaments where we'll have 90 minutes per side, and
Gotcha.
I will. So that's going to be a couple hour, 2-3 hour game, and then I will
Right.
set up a board next to me, and I'll kind of pretend I'm that person sitting across from me and
Playing.
play that way.
Right. 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 Yeah. So my sense is that there's probably not a big difference in terms of uh, yeah, in terms of kind of what you get, like the adding the extra dimension there. I don't think is that important.
Okay.
Um, and playing over the board, or at least I can't think of a way that it would be important. Maybe someone else can. Um, but there are these studies that look at, say, reading on a screen versus
Mm.
reading on paper, um, and, and generally, one, obviously, looking at a screen, staring at lights causes eye strain, unsurprisingly, and especially when you are looking at a board, like, I mean, you have to, I mean, I played Go online a fair amount in the early 2000s as well, and
Mm.
I'm just staring at the board, online. And so that probably causes some eye strain. But you also, and I don't know how much this research will translate, but the research on reading suggests that uh, if you have people even read something with pictures involved, um, uh, the reading comprehension is lower when you read it on a screen than when you read it
Interesting.
kind of on paper. And I mean, that it's a small gap. I don't want to overstate that
Okay.
it's a big gap. It's very small. Um, but there could be something there in terms of, I don't know. I don't really know what.
Well,
But that it's just there are certain things that are happening on the screen that are. I mean, I don't mean like literal distractions like notifications, but just from the way that your brain has to process the
right.
screen, um, it might just add a little bit of extra kind of friction
I
to
see.
it that
Interesting.
maybe you don't get by playing over the board. Um, but I mean, I think what you were referencing earlier, people playing like completely online, they learn how to play and then they go into a physical tournament and they do terribly or something. I think that's probably more due to stress and more due to the uncomfortableness of the environment and the
Yeah.
kind of like everything's
Or
new.
maybe the
And I think
stakes
it has
involved.
less to do with the difference in the mode,
Okay, so it's
would
not
be my guess.
necessarily a two D versus 3D experience, and some argument, not arguments, but some viewpoints which I don't not share necessarily is that getting used to the tactile nature of the pieces and being able to move the pieces has a well, for me it's enjoyable. I like kind of looking at my pieces and they look nice and and moving them around on the
Yep.
board, but there's not necessarily a scientific um, backing to that other than maybe anecdotal or personal preference. Is that what you're maybe
That's
suggesting?
what I would say. And I say this as someone, I mean, I stopped playing online Go quite a while ago, and I still would play in person. Just, I love the clack on the
Yeah,
wood,
yeah,
the little, just the whole environment, like, and I personally, I mean, I feel more drawn in when
right.
I'm playing a game in person in terms of like, the sounds fade away, everything, you're just focused on the game. Uh, but yeah, I have a hard time saying, there's some scientific research to
Right,
suggest, or there's
right.
some reason, cognitively that there should be a big difference.
Okay.
I think it does come down to, personal preference, and I'm sure the people who play online, they probably got used to it, right? And maybe I don't know. We could talk to them and be like, hey, you learned all online, and with the screen, does it feel weird to play, in person? Do you prefer
Maybe
the
we'll
screen? And maybe
organize
some
our
of them
own
do.
research study on this
Yeah,
separately, but
that'd be awesome.
or
Yeah.
at least or maybe at least a very follow up video when everybody yells at us about why it's better to use a board. But
Right, right,
well, and I
right.
do think the way I said because like I have like friends of me, I talk to a lot of people about chess improvement, and like I said, we always joke that we should spend more time actually trying to improve instead of just talking about it. But the uh, the idea for me, like I'll tell people, well, if it's going to take you like going over a master game maybe takes you an hour, or if you're gonna or if you simulate you're trying to guess the moves, it might take you a couple hours. It might be good to set up a board, whereas if you're solving a puzzle like the puzzle rush where each puzzle is going to take 2 seconds to solve, then yeah,
Yeah,
the cost benefit, you're going to see 100 puzzles as opposed to setting up 10 puzzles. The cost benefit might not be worth setting up the board even if there is a benefit. So
yep,
so it's something
yep.
where people need to. But that being said, I'm still going to be setting up my board, and I know several friends of mine are going to be like, "That guy's full of it."
Yeah,
But
yeah.
thank you. That is interesting though. No, it is funny though because there's some coaches out there, master level coaches, who they swear by it. They said you got to use the board. You're going to remember better. And but to me, it's sort of one of those things where you might like to use a board, but it might not necessarily.
Right.
Maybe it's a psychological thing. They feel more focused when they're doing it, but that might be a personal
Well,
preference.
yeah. I mean, this is something about not. I don't want to like, um, I guess dis coaches in general, but you like. I think first of all, if you have an instructor or a coach, you are in a way better position than if you don't. Like it's just they can see you growing. They can give you the right things for you. A really good coach is invaluable.
Right.
But you do see across the board here that there are lots of different opinions about what the best thing to do is. And if some masters say X and other masters say Y, or some grandmasters say X and other grandmasters say Y, well, it's a sign that you can get good doing either of those. Like it's probably a sign that if there isn't a consensus. I'm not saying that is 100% the case. You can have a consensus on completely the wrong thing, or
Right.
you can have a consensus on the right thing, or whatever. But if there's not a consensus, and people are at least somewhat aware of their own training methods, then it is a sign that maybe this isn't that important, or maybe people can be successful in different ways. Yeah, like some of the things, like the interleaving thing, I would
Right.
like stake a lot of money on that being way more effective. But there are a lot of the other things that we've talked about here, like the exact percentage of Blitz games you play, the number of constructed problems that you tackle. Like, if you turn the dial a little bit this way, turn the dial a little bit that way, who's to say that it's that much better for you? We're talking about little small margins. So
Right.
if you get the big stuff right, if you get the big stuff in terms of getting good feedback, in terms of thinking about your moves, giving yourself the kind of the time to practice making the decisions, you involve competitive play. Like, if you get the big stuff right, then a lot of the little stuff, it doesn't matter that much what you
Oh
decide
yeah.
to do. I mean,
But
in
we
this
love
case, I
arguing
just
about
think it.
it.
Yeah.
We love
Unless you
arguing
want to
about
argue
it.
about it.
Yeah. But I do
You
think
want
in
that
the end,
little edge. That little edge.
yeah,
It's always a
exactly.
game of little edges. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, the last one is a little more for fun here, but maybe it's watching instructional chess videos. Now, obviously, I have instructional chess videos on this channel, so I'm an
I'm gonna say
advocate for it. But I do think
the
there
number
are,
one thing you should do:
yeah.
watch lots of instructional chess videos.
But I do
Brian's
think
channel in particular.
um, I guess if you can maybe give us a couple tips on, because I do think, and we kind of alluded to this, right, with all of our studying master games, which I talk about in my chess videos, talking about solving problems, which we do on my videos. There seems to be sort of the idea of a person's engagement and their active participation in it, and maybe you could speak a little bit to that, because I think, like what you're talking about, the actual method itself may not be as important as the how we're engaging with the
Yep.
method.
Yep. So I will. I mean, I'll tell you what I think most people do on YouTube, and what I do on YouTube also from time to time is that you go and you watch video, and the whole structure of YouTube, the whole ecosystem is basically built on getting you to watch another video, right? Another video, another video. So the whole idea is that you're binging, and really the best thing for someone to do is to go to your channel and watch every video you've ever done. Like if you're a channel owner or channel creator. But this is really bad for learning, or I think it's bad. Binging content in general, I don't think is very helpful for learning, because you run into this, like, you you haven't done anything beforehand, and you haven't done anything afterward, and you're just taking in, say, like 2 hours of content. This video is probably almost going to be 2 hours long. And you haven't actually kind of thought about the ideas that are being presented. And so what happens is that you get a whole chunk of material, and you're going to forget most of it. I mean, again, things stay in long-term memory. The problem is the retrieval process. So you can't get back to some of the things that you heard. And you're also probably not paying attention fully for that amount of time. And so the question is really, how do you use videos effectively? And when it comes to chess, I think the answer is that you make a little bit of a plan, right? You figure out, like, what are you going to do before the video and what are you going to do after the video?
Okay.
Because if you're just watching videos all the time, I think you're not getting as much out of it as you could. And so before the video, like, let's say, I don't know, if you have videos on a certain openings or something, or maybe certain sets of problems. Well, I might, if I was watching one of your videos, I might say, take a brief look at the opening that you were going to talk about in your video. I might like just kind of understand, like, oh, okay, this is the basic moves, and then maybe this video is going to help me understand the reasons why these moves happen, and maybe give me some other variations to think about, right? And so what you've done is you've created a kind of prior knowledge. You've kind of created prior knowledge so that when you watch this video, the things are going to be relevant to you. So you're not hearing about it for the very first time from, Brian's mouth. Like, this is all brand new to me. Because if it's all brand new, then you're only going to get little pieces of it. Right. And then what you're going to do after is say, I recommend people to do kind of what I call like a free recall exercise. But in chess, this probably means something like, hey, go back to the board and try to remember all the variations that you learned, or try to reconstruct that problem that you saw. And you don't have to do it right away. It's not like immediately you close the video, you do this, but take some time off for a little while, come back to it an hour later, or come back to it the next day, and just see what you remember. And you will be surprised both by how much you've forgotten, but then if you sit there for a little while and try to pull everything out, sometimes how much you can actually remember, and your confidence will increase. That, like, oh, I do know this. I did remember this.
And I will link your video to the free recall. You did a video about free recall. I started doing it with my opening study, and it. But besides being fun, and I would, and this isn't part of the. I forgot to change the. I would study the opening, whether it be from a video or from a book, and then I would close the book and I would go either play a video game or do some dishes or something, do something else.
Right.
And I would come back and then, and I would use my boards, my chess software to list it, but I would try to repeat the moves without looking at the reference, and then I would check the reference, and then I would do it again maybe a couple hours later, and it was I was surprised at. Because a lot of the software that I use to quiz this, Chessable, I've noticed, and like I said to everybody, I love Chessable. I use Chessable a lot, and I'm friends with the people involved with Chessable. But they will kind of give you one side, and then you show the response. But by having to come up with both sides, then I have to think to myself, oh, he has 3 ways to respond to this, and so instead of remembering, okay, here's the one he's showing me, I just have to remember one cue, one response.
Right.
Now I have to think, well, what are the 3 responses, and then why are they different? And then I feel getting a little deeper into actually understanding the opening. But it all started out by watching that free recall video that you had. So.
Yeah, no, I'm glad it's been working out for you. And it sounds like you've adapted. I mean, I talked about kind of a super basic version in that video, but it seems like you have wisely adapted this to the chess playing kind of situation. Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you recognize, as long as you don't fool yourself into thinking that just because you watched a video, you learned what was said.
Right.
That's really where people go wrong. And it's the same true with like watching lectures or listening to like a podcast or something like that. I mean, I do this a lot too. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and then it's like, wait, what do I remember from the podcast that I listened to a week ago? But the other thing to think about is the spacing, like we talked about before, where, you want to kind of space out your video watching, instructional video watching time. You want, and that, there's that problem. There's the problem of watching something that maybe isn't at the right level for you. Is another issue where it's like, hey, you just don't have the background to understand this, and so maybe not everything is for everybody. And I
Right.
think on YouTube in particular, there's this issue where it's like, well, everything is available to everybody,
Yep.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to watch this thing right now. And if you can kind of find motivations to watch something, when a certain someone played an opening against you, oh crap, you weren't prepared. Oh, that's a really good time to watch an instructional video. You had an experience with this already. Now you watch the instructional video to help you kind of resolve that in your mind. Um, and so, yeah, finding those moments and mixing up your. I mean, I think if you never watched any instructional videos, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you like you want to be, I mean, all the techniques that we've talked about, like they all have some value or some role to play, or most of them do. And so
Hmm.
like layering them together and not like tipping the scales in one way, or, too much. It's easy to play a video. So you think, well, my study time will just be watching videos. But that's not really the highest level of cognitive engagement that you can have, most likely. So, yeah, mixing it up, making sure it's appropriate for you, all that stuff, spacing it out.
That sounds great. Um, I think this is a good point to sort of wrap it up, at least for the video. And just I want everyone to participate in the comments and ask questions, and I'm sure Ben would be happy to respond maybe to some
Sure.
relevant
Yeah.
things. And maybe if there's
Yeah,
enough interest, we could do a follow up video maybe in the future after Ben gets some
for
sleep,
sure.
of course. But I really appreciate having you having this conversation. And like I said, I'm going to link in a playlist. I'll link a few of my favorite videos of Ben's. As well that talk about some of the concept that we've referenced today, and hopefully, and then in the description, if Ben's going to give me his contact info, if anyone wants to reach out to him personally, I think that might be a good thing to do as well.
For sure,
But
for sure. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you.
yeah,
Super fun.
hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and again, thank you, Ben, for such a nice conversation. Right over here, I have a playlist with some of my favorite videos of Ben's that I think are relevant to chess players, and I hope you'll check them out as well as some of his other videos. And leave a comment if you have any questions for Ben. He is very generous with his time and would be happy to answer any questions. And um, really hope that you enjoyed this experience. I was looking forward to making this video with him, and I don't think I was disappointed at all. So, anyways, have a great day, guys, and I'll